Members of the committee, we do have quorum. I will call the meeting to order. And I'd ask you please to turn your electronic devices to silent. Make sure you're properly signed into the system. And I do have an announcement to begin the meeting, please. Today, November 8th, is World Town Planning Day. But where's Sandy? Yeah, he has the motion. Yes, it's the middle part. Can you see it, Bart? Oh, good. Today, November 8th, is World Town Planning Day, and it's been celebrated since 1949. World Town Planning Day is an international day celebrating the accomplishments of planners and their contributions to their communities. Each year on November 8th, planners in more than 30 countries participate in World Town Planning Day activities annually, a practice that began in 1949. Both the Canadian Institute of Planners and the Ontario Professional Planners Institute support World Town Planning Day as an opportunity to promote better understanding and awareness of Canadian planners and planning to local communities and all levels of government. And I think that Councillor Maves has a motion.
Yes, I have it.
You don't need to stand, Councillor.
I like standing.
Oh, okay, all right.
It gets a stretch that way. Whereas the full benefits of community planning requires public officials and citizens to understand, support, demand excellence in planning and plan implementation, and whereas the celebration of World Town Planning Day gives us the opportunity to publicly recognize the participation and dedication of the members of the committees involved in the planning processes, registered professional planners and other professionals and citizens who have contributed their time and expertise to the planning of the Niagara region. Therefore, I, Bart Maves,
yes,
of the Niagara Region Planning and Economic Development Committee, do hereby proclaim November 8th, 2017 as World Town Planning Day.
Thank you, and that was seconded by Councillor Augustine?
That's right.
Yes. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you, that was unanimous. It is now World Planning Day. Make sure you all behave like you know what planning is.
And you get the day off.
Yeah, right. No, staff gets the evening off. Thank you very much for that. And the Commissioner has an announcement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom Villela as the Manager of Special Projects, a recently added addition. Stand up, Tom. Please stay standing. Tom will be leading the region's district plan program that you're familiar with the Glendale, Niagara on the Green district plan being the first order of business for him. He will also be supporting the preparation and approval of secondary plans across the region. Tom is a registered professional planner. He brings 30 years of award-winning planning experience to our team. He has a unique specialization and passion for neighborhood planning and renewal. He holds a diploma in urban planning and design from Fanshawe College. He has studied at Brock University and at the University of North Carolina. He's a member of the Canadian Association of Certified Planning Technicians, the Congress of New Urbanism, the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, and the Canadian Institute of Planners. For the last 6 years, Tom has been the manager of zoning and special projects at the City of Markham, and he previously held several planning roles with the town of Fort Erie and the City of Welland many years ago. Tom is, and this is good news, Tom is originally from the City of Welland, so he's back, having attended Notre Dame High School, and he has recently relocated back to Fort Erie from Markham. So welcome, Tom. Thank you.
Welcome home. Thank you for that, Reno. Now, would committee members please be willing to move the consideration of the development charge items to being the last items dealt with on the agenda? Please, could I have, there's 2 consent items and a couple of presentations and the report. So will someone move that, please? Councillor Dart, a seconder. Councillor Maves, all in favor? Thank you, and that's carried.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to declare a conflict of interest.
Yes, I was going to be asking that next, sorry.
Very pleased with the motion to move these.
Thank you. So are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to disclose an indirect pecuniary interest in the policies around, or the matters around development charges, as it may have an effect on a business that my family is involved in.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor. And now, the first item on the agenda is ED 15, Economic Development Working Group. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that report, please? Moved by Councillor Luciani and seconded by Councillor Height. And did you wish to speak to this, Director Oakes?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, maybe just to provide the committee a bit of an update. So the reason for the establishment of the Economic Development Working Group is in response to some of the structural changes that happened to the Economic Development Office after I came on board. Also, with the adoption of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, we now have a committee that we're reporting through. So the idea was to reestablish an economic development working group committee that would be made up solely of private sector stakeholders representing a cross-section of industry throughout the region to help us staff develop our strategy. And then when we get to the point of discussions, that would come forward to this committee for that discussion and then get to council. So it's just providing an opportunity to have more private sector advisory into the development of our work plans moving forward.
Thank you for that. Questions, Councillor Timms?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious in the report why the existing advisory panel has not met since April of 2016.
Director Oakes?
Through you, Madam Chair. When I first came on, we looked at the operations, and I had a meeting with the chair of the EDAP committee, and the projects that they were involved with had been completed. They'd been presented to council in April of 16. Looking at what they had done and knowing that we were going to undertake a bit of a change in how the structure of the Economic Development Office was, I didn't see, there didn't seem to be a need to have that committee meet. So it's taken a bit longer than we had hoped, but the plan now is, now that we have the new structure, we have a new communication structure through the Planning and Economic Development Committee. This working group will be established to help us develop a master plan and then report through that. So,
well, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that those remarks. I'm curious then what input or what opinion that panel has had and when they had any opportunity to express their opinions on this, the abolition of their group and the reestablishment of the new group and the new terms of reference.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have discussions with various stakeholders, not all of them. And, you know, I think the biggest point was we didn't have a meeting and I didn't receive one email asking when our next meeting was. So I use that as a bit of an identification that, you know, we had an opportunity to repurpose the group. And I think this is the best way moving forward.
Okay, then the moving along, Madam Chair, page 4 of 6 of the, I guess it's page 25 in the agenda, has to do with the composition of this new panel. Where it identifies the director, 1 representative of the finance sector, 2 of the post-secondary education sector, 1 of the industrial, 1 of real estate, 1 of the innovation sector, 1 labor market, 1 representative of the Canadian United States border, and 3 business owners. So those are the membership that we're here to approve or discuss. And it gives you a sizable board. was this kind of the general drift of the discussions you'd had, is that you needed this size of an agency?
Through Madam Chair, the sort of the thought process that went into the membership was to have a good cross-section of private sector stakeholders, recognizing that some of the direction that we're moving in with the binational and repositioning Niagara as a gateway, we saw an opportunity to have that Canada-United States border representation as well, building on the foreign trade zone. So this was really to represent the cross-section of the regional sort of economic makeup.
Thank you. So could you just spend a minute about the, what the intention, how many times a year they intend to meet, and how do they decide what subjects or what projects they're going to look into or discuss?
Through Madam Chair, essentially we have it scheduled for them to meet quarterly, and they would really be providing direction on the yearly work plan. But at the first onset of the committee, we're going to be establishing in 2018 to undertake a long-term economic development master plan that starts to position the region in a longer-term timeframe, 2041. And we're actually in discussions with Niagara College and Brock University to do it as a co-venture. So this group would help provide some guidance into the development of that strategy in the initial phase. And then once established, they'll be really helping staff make sure that we're on plan, or if we need to do some pivoting throughout. That would then come to this committee for discussion to validate whether or not that is something that this committee wants to go forward with.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Feel free to discuss this one, because I see that they would have had no chance to discuss development charges issues. So my conflict doesn't apply to this committee at this point. So I'll leave further questions. Thank you for now.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. On the existing committee, my recollection is that there were representatives of the economic development offices from across the municipalities. Can we just hear about the makeup of that existing advisory panel?
Through Madam Chair, the panel, the existing panel had representation from, there were 4 council members on the committee. There was a representative of one educational institution, Brock University, or sorry, Niagara College. There was one EDO representing the economic development offices, and then private sector. The intent and idea of this working group is it's more of helping us move our strategy and develop our strategy. All of the economic development offices would be included in that as sort of ex officio, and you know, we don't do things in isolation. We try to do things as a team Niagara. So the notion of the working group is to build on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Is that in the terms of reference here about ex officio, or the working together with the EDOs and the area municipalities? I didn't see it.
No, it's not, and that's something that we could add to it, just to put it in the established terms of reference, because it really builds on the idea of Team Niagara and what we're doing. So I'm happy to have that.
That's what I was thinking. Yep. Again, so if staff can figure out the best way to do that, it doesn't have to be, it wouldn't be the membership, but we're hearing it's a ex officio. And one other question here, when it says one representative of the industrial sector, versus it talks about business owners. So the Niagara Industrial, what do they call it? NIA, what's the A for? Association? Niagara Industrial Association has a staff person. Is it your vision that that staff person would be here as the representative of the industrial sector, or is it your vision that this is a board member or a person that the board has designated from among their membership?
Through Madam Chair, the third point. So basically, it would be up to the board to nominate somebody to sit on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you, Chair. 2 representatives of post-secondary education sector, I'm going to assume hopefully, Chair, that's because we have two post-secondary education. So it's one from Brock and one from Niagara College. Thank you. One representative of the Canadian United States border. Could you please, through you, Chair, could you please explain to me, describe to me who that person might be? Where would that person come from? What is that person?
Through you, Madam Chair, it could be, so the reason for having that sort of representation is really, as I mentioned, to build on the idea that we're building a binational strategy and using our location as an advantage for business attraction, connecting companies into the United States market. So the type of representative could be somebody who's in the international trade business. So it could be a customs broker type of firm or representative. Could be somebody who is a part of one of the bridge commissions dealing with regulatory issues that we see through border trade. That's the type of person that we would be identifying and looking towards. As we start to identify issues and opportunities, they should be able to help provide some insight into how we can best, move forward.
And that person would need to be Canadian.
Through you, Madam Chair, not necessarily. It was sort of assumed that it would be, but we don't have a prescribed notion of whether it be Canadian or American. But yeah.
You think it would be helpful for our trade to have an American on this advisory committee to help us develop economically in Niagara, whereas it wouldn't be in conflict with something that they were trying to develop in New York State, for instance, in Buffalo?
Yeah.
That could be a problem, could it not?
Through Madam Chair, no, I think, we do have relationships with our counterparts on the other side of the border. We're starting to actually develop them on a more fulsome basis. They see value in what's happening on our side of the border and vice versa. And one of the things in the conversations that we've been having recently is how do we better leverage each other in what we're doing from an investment attraction standpoint. So it all depends on who in the organization that would be representative. There are going to be times when we're not aligned. I understand that, but the key and really what we're trying to drive at is how do we better leverage our unique position within the North American market, and we're on a border, so there may be some, whether it's on the committee or whether it's part of a working group is another story, but we sit on various binational committees now.
I don't want you to get the idea that I was necessarily opposed to an American being there. It's just that I had questions regarding how that committee or how this working group would operate, and I suppose that if worse came to worse, that it could just be, if it was a person from the United States, and they could just say, well, I'm sorry, we're dealing with that as well from our side, so I'll have to declare conflict. I mean, that wouldn't be a problem. So I didn't want you to get the idea that I'm being narrow-minded. I'm not. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you were just asking the questions to make sure. Councillor Annunziata.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at the membership makeup, I'm going to assume that the concept and the goal is retention and attraction. Because when I look at the makeup of the board, it speaks to existing Niagara skill sets in market.
Through Madam Chair, so the sort of the breakdown we have from the membership was trying to be a representation of what exists in Niagara. And, having said that, that may change in 5 years, 10 years, so the composition would have to reflect the makeup. It is, the arrangement that we have with our local municipal partners is we focus on the investment attraction, work with them. On the retention side, we do it in partnership. The idea of this is it's a point in time right now where we are today. This working group will help us develop a strategy as we move forward, which may actually change the composition as things evolve. But I just note that this is really providing us, our staff, an opportunity to have the private sector have some say, and then ultimately it comes back to this committee for adoption.
Okay, so ultimately, and thank you for that, ultimately, if it's the goal and the responsibility of this council to set policy that's going to inure the environment, that's going to create the conditions for economic development and economic investment. For example, I know a big initiative with this council has been transportation corridors, no matter what they are, whether it's train, whether it's airport, whether it's by land, sea, air, rail, whatever it is. So if that is part and parcel to the economic agenda moving forward, which, out of this membership here, who is going to be in the best situation to, I guess, to represent transportation corridors? I mean, I'm looking at the sector representation, and it's very unique transportation needs to each one of these sectors, but as far as an overarching goal, as far as what Niagara needs.
Through Madam Chair, I guess 2 points. One, the thought of the Canada-United States has some element of that. But we could add that, we have the 3 business owners that, and just gave some examples of what that could relate to. We could change that down to 2 and have 1 transportation logistics representative, because that's a valid point. I would agree.
And thank you for those comments. And I think it's a valid point, because I think ultimately this is a council that looks for evidence-based, information coming forward. And I know the issue of airports has always been a hot button issue with this particular council. So if there's an objective outside authority that can speak to the importance of transportation corridors, which include air, rail, road, by sea, and provide this council with that direction and those comments, I think it would be very, very important. So I'm looking to make that amendment to this, to add someone from the transportation sector that can lend us a hand when we have that discussion again when it comes to airports.
Right, I'll just look to Councillor Luciani and Councillor Height. Is that a friendly amendment? Councillor Luciani, Councillor Height. Councillor Height? Right, okay, thank you. Great, thank you. Yes, Councillor Timms?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just to the amendments, and I thank Councillor Annunziata for bringing that up. The one that transportation area that needs particular attention right now is marine transportation. And I know we have several businesses in the region that are directly related. So can we add that as a specific to this board?
Well, I think it means all modes of transportation, right?
I know, and that's a broad, so that's the rail guy that competes with the marine guy that competes with the road guy that competes with the airport guy.
All of the above.
So my intention then is to add an amendment specifically to add the marine transportation to this panel.
Okay, Councillor Luciani, Councillor Height, add marine to transportation. Yes, Luciani. Right, good. Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Do we still have 3?
Thank you, members.
Yeah, we still have.
In terms of ownership, because then we're going to have to amend the maximum number of people.
No, I think it's of those 3.
So 2 of them are transportation experts now. and
1.
only- Well, 1 is marine and 1 is possibly rail.
No, I don't think that's the way, or that's not the way I took it. 1 will be transportation, including marine, rail, et cetera, et cetera. That was the intent, so that's the amendment.
Madam Chair, that was not my intention.
Oh, well
It was
then,
to add 1 additional to the board specifically for marine transportation.
right. Yeah, Councillor Luciani? But Councillor Height does not accept it, so it's
Well,
going to go to
I will move it as a separate amendment, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Joyner, are you ready for the question? All in favor? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. Oakes wanted to add something.
So just for clarity, so is the motion adding an additional member to the committee, so the numbers would then,
Yeah,
would go up by one? I'm just trying to get clarification.
Yes, Madam Chair, and a committee of 13 is better than a committee of
Right.
12, because you do, so
Of
there's an
course.
advantage that way.
all right, ready for the question? All in favor? Any opposed? Why don't we have a recorded vote and then we can you sign me in, please? The vote is open. And it carries. And now I'll call the vote on the amended motion. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that discussion. Moving on to the GO implementation project. Diana Moriali, please, if you can come forward, and Jack Thompson. And for those of you who are at Public Works, this did appear as a consent item on yesterday morning's agenda, and it's now here for consideration. So, Ms. Moriali, please take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of Planning Committee, for allowing Jack and I the opportunity to provide an overview of Metrolink's draft 2041 Regional Transportation Plan. So as many of you may know, Metrolinx is a provincial agency that was formed under the Metrolinx Act back in 2006. Metrolinx is mandated to improve the coordination and integration of all modes of transportation in the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area. In 2008, Metrolinx released its first regional transportation plan. It was titled The Big Move. And The Big Move is now currently up for its 10-year review. And the draft 2041 Regional Transportation Plan is intended to replace The Big Move and further align with provincial plans. The draft 2041 Regional Transportation Plan is currently out for public consultation, and that is why we are here today. The final draft is intended to be approved by the Metrolinx Board of Directors by December 2017, and regional staff have reviewed the document and have provided comments from Niagara Region's perspective, and those comments are summarized in Report PDS 45 2017. I'm just going to turn it over to Jack to provide some context on the RTP.
Thank you, Diana. So the 2041 RTP is a very comprehensive document. It has many strategies, directives, and programs. So in order to message the information in a manageable way, Metrolinx has summarized the various implementation strategies into 5 specific strategies which are shown on the graph. The first one, which is strategy 1, is to complete the delivery of current regional transit projects. Metrolinx has identified that the main priority that they have is to complete the GO Regional Express Rail that transforms basically the existing GO Rail system from a commuter-focused base to an express rail system that has frequent two-way and all-day service. The next priority within that group is to complete the 15 transit projects that they classify as in delivery. Those projects are either under construction or in advanced engineering design. And of course, what's of interest to the region of Niagara of those 15 is the Niagara GO service extension to Niagara 2021 to Grimsby, 2023 to Niagara Falls, the extension of this GO Regional Rail Express to Hamilton by 2024, and the Hamilton LRT. Because as GO service comes into Hamilton as all-day service, and we have extension to Niagara, we have an opportunity to transfer between those services to get into the Toronto area if that's where they're going. The next set of priorities relates to what they classify as development priorities, and these are projects that are in advanced stages of planning and design. Now, most of those projects are happening within the City of Toronto or the region of York, but I think of interest to the region of Niagara is the implementation of bus rapid transit services in Peel along Dundas, and in Peel in the city of Brampton, and in the region of Halton along Dundas Street, which will come from Oakville right through to Mississauga. So that's important for the region because we can absorb some of the lessons learned in the implementation of those BRT services as Niagara continues to expand its transit services. The second strategy is to connect more of the region with frequent rapid transit. So connecting more people to move places frequently requires fast and frequent services to areas within the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area that have not yet developed to the density levels or the ridership levels that would support rapid transit. So Metrolinx has come forward with various ideas, including that they should be looking at 24-hour bus service along specific corridors. Probably not of importance to the region of Niagara, but what is important under this strategy is that the current Metrolinx mandate is to look at planning initiatives within the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area. Really, for this strategy to help the region of Niagara, we really require Metrolinx to expand its planning area to the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The third strategy, which is to optimize transportation system, really means making the most of the existing infrastructure, and that includes fare and service integration, providing transit services for first and last mile. This one's really critical because as they go forward, Metrolinx really needs to advocate for increased funding to local municipalities to provide that service for the first and last mile. They talk about integrated mobility service, and that relates to maybe travel apps or other transportation systems. But again, as we go forward, any of these mobility services have to be accessible and affordable to all income groups. A large component of the transit riderships are in the lower income group. Therefore, they have to have, just because they don't have the money, that means they may not get some of the more advanced technology, but we have to make sure that we incorporate them into the general technology. We need to continue to update the barrier-free access to transit services, and we need to start to use the HOV lanes on the transportation system to support more reliable bus service. So Metrolinx has indicated that they've had good success using the HOV lanes to meet service schedules. And that's important to the region of Niagara because, again, in the long term, we've identified, and the MTO has identified, that the QEW will be widened, and when it is widened, those new lanes will be HOV. Strategy 4, which is really to integrate land use and transportation. The message here is that the land use decision making must align with transportation planning and transportation infrastructure investments. We cannot be looking at separate pillars. We have to be looking at it as a co-joined activity. We have to focus intensification of land use at transit stations and mobility hubs. And when we're designing those particular communities, we have to incorporate ride sharing and active transportation. Strategy 5 is to prepare for an uncertain future. So Metrolinx indicates in the report that we live in a time of constant and accelerated change, and in order to address these changes, we need to be able to, or Metrolinx needs to be able to develop a provincial framework to evaluate and regulate new transportation technologies, whether that's autonomous vehicles, ride-sharing groups. They also need to develop guidelines to deal with climate change. We've had a lot of flooding lately, so we need to make sure that we can accommodate those issues as we go forward, as well as look for opportunities to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Oops, going the wrong way there. So this slide here really provides an opportunity to show the alignment between the region of Niagara's Transportation Master Plan, which was approved by Council in July of this year, with the strategies, directions, policies that have been identified in the Metrolinx 2041 Regional Transportation Plan. So that specific graphic, we see that we align quite nicely with how Metrolinx is proceeding with their planning and how the region of Niagara is proceeding. And I think that's important because it shows that the region of Niagara is well prepared to be an active participant in various aspects of the 2041 RTP, including GO service expansion, mobility hubs, fare and service integration, emerging technologies, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Almost done. So quickly, there are multiple overlapping transportation planning areas within the province, and we wanted to highlight them and bring them to your attention. The map before you illustrates 3 different transportation boundary areas, and what we're requesting Metrolinx is for some consistency. So for example, the Metrolinx mandated planning area is also known as the Greater Toronto Hamilton area and was established by the province, and includes the municipalities of Hamilton, Halton, Peel, York, Toronto, and Durham. So it's the colored municipalities. Oh, this is a little different. In blue, orange, purple, green, and red. And the GO Transit surface area is another geographical area that includes the larger region. So it includes the mandated Metrolinx planning area, but it also includes the areas surrounding that that are highlighted in dark gray. And lastly, there is the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which is a larger geographic area for which the province establishes growth management and transportation policies through the provincial growth plan. And it includes the entire area plus 2 municipalities that are highlighted in lighter gray. And what we're asking the province is that there should be consistency, and that these 3 areas they function right now currently as one regional economy. And we believe that the 2041 Regional Transportation Plan should look at a wholesome transportation planning study area instead of these 3 geographical areas. So lastly, in conclusion, we have offered the following comments to Metrolinx on their draft 2041 Regional Transportation Plan. And the first one is that Niagara Region supports the creation of the Transportation Planning Policy Statement. However, we believe that extensive consultation and engagement on the creation of this policy statement is required, and that Niagara Region be included. Secondly, flexibility from the Greenbelt Plan restrictions around the Grimsby GO station is necessary to fully realize the station potential and support a complete community solution. As well, as previously mentioned, we recommend the inclusion of a GO Transit service area in the Greater Golden Horseshoe in the Metrolinx mandated planning area. And we also recommend that Metrolinx looks beyond the Greater Golden Horseshoe and looks strategically at how it can provide connections into New York State. And we also recommend that Metrolinx include Niagara Region transit operators in the Greater Toronto Hamilton Transit Operators Working Group. And lastly, we believe that the regional traveler personas that were created as part of the background information for the RTP should reflect the Niagara Region traveler, and we believe at this time it does not. So at this time, if there's any questions, Jack and I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Just one thing, Diana, at the meeting yesterday, I asked about the funding requirements that we might face by looking at examples of other regions. Do you have that information?
Through you, Madam Chair, we've contacted our colleagues in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area to see what their requirements are. We've yet to hear back, but once we find out, we will come back to committee with that information.
Great, thank you very much. Could I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor as well as the presentation? Councillor Easton, Councillor Joyner, and questions, Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if we could have that last slide up. I wanted to, well, actually the 6, that one makes my point as well too, is that very much appreciate the approach to emphasizing that Niagara Region should be part of the Golden Horseshoe. If you go back in history long enough, we were certainly part of the Horseshoe when it came to building the QEW, and the mode of transportation that was just gaining favor at the time was automotive. And we were part of the Golden Horseshoe since at that time. But lately, in the last 20 years or so, we've our end of the horseshoe has kind of settled into the sand and become invisible as GTA kind of takes over everything. So the approach now is to make sure that our end of the horseshoe comes out of the sand as far as rail service goes. And I think you do make that point fairly well, and the map does as well too. So I think that it may be, speaking to the motion as well as the question, Madam Chair, is that our local MPPs have been a great help in advancing this GO Rail project for us. And I think it would be appropriate to include them in the circulation part of the motion so that they know exactly what we're asking and they're better equipped to advance their cause at Queen's Park. So we can just add that as a friendly amendment? Yes, thank you. Then I think that will be very helpful. And I guess my final question is, have we had any engagement on this process with the local MPPs? I know Member Bradley has been working on this since he was first elected in 1978 or whatever year it was. So have they been engaged in this and offered any comments to us?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not aware of what the consultation was through the MPPs. I do know that this is out for consultation throughout the study area, so anybody can comment on it. So, and that Metrolinx is going throughout the study area to do roundtable events to get public feedback.
Okay, well, thank you. I think it's just most important that in recognition of the efforts they've made to help us with this, that we include them in the circulation and perhaps invite them for comment and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I will call the motion. All in favor? And any opposed? And it's carried unanimously. And thank you very much, Jack and Diana. Thank you. Now, can I get a mover and seconder to receive the following consent items? 6.1, C37, open house meeting about the transportation policies, the regional official plan amendment number 13. 6.2, PDSC 30, the Niagara Community Design Awards. And 6.3, PDS 49, the MOU Planning Services in Niagara. A mover and a seconder for those, Councillor Beatty, and seconded by Councillor Dart. And now, any questions or comments to any of the three reports? Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. The first one is to correspondence item 30, 6.2. This is biannual, not biannual. So you're recommending every 2 years. Can we just hear more about that and whether that was discussed with the groups that are involved?
Yeah, Director Giles.
Through you, Madam Chair, what we have done is we did attempt to try to reach out to those who were involved, but we're not able to organize a meeting with them. We had discussions with them last year about this as well. Part of the reason is because particularly over the last couple of years, there's been a declining number of nominations, and we looked at some of other awards like this, and they are held, a lot of other places do hold it every 2 years, and we felt that with the holding it every 2 years would actually allow us to look at a greater number of developments over that period of time. So those were why some of these decisions were made.
Councillor?
Okay, thanks very much. I find it surprising that there wouldn't be a large number. I know there's a number of projects across the region, and let's hope that many, many more of them are smart growth and adhere to these principles. And so as we have development, there should be more. I think, Madam Chair, it's not only that this should be received, but I'd like to make an amendment that this gets circulated to the members of that committee, that group, and then we can hear back from them. It looks like we're going to move ahead with the 2018 Design Awards, and then we can hear back from them to see if
and the commissioner
that's
is
a final
indicating that they
decision or
will
not.
do that. Thank you, Councillor.
I have a comment.
Yes.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Augustine, for your interest in this, and I know that you're very supportive. When we were considering going to a biannual event once every 2 years, we actually are thinking of perhaps even expanding the scope, almost kind of like a mini design summit that might be more than just the one evening event that we've had in the past. It might be a 2-day sort of design summit where we bring in some notable speakers and experts to sort of enhance our accomplishments with respect to planning and architecture in Niagara. So it's a bit of a rebranding, but also actually, you know, we don't want to marginalize it. It's actually to enhance and make it a more prominent event every 2 years.
Thank you. I like the sounds of that, and I think the Smarter Niagara Steering Committee would like to hear that as well. So can we add that it be circulated to that committee? That's something that they've talked about. There used to be some significant summits in Niagara, and there haven't been, and maybe that's led to a decline in applications because of that. So it would be great to have an afternoon event with some design, some sharing, best practices, and then the awards in the evening, or a full day event as the commissioner is speaking about. So if those can be circulated, and that would be great. The next one is on number 49. Can we just hear more about this? Because it sounded like when this idea first came to us, it was going to be really quick and done before the end of the year. Now we have some revised timelines and some involvement of other groups. Can we just hear more about it, please?
Director Giles.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the area planners have basically have a subcommittee that has been looking at the memorandum of understanding. In the last meeting that was had, basically the associate director of development planning was basically running this working group. And at the last meeting, which was sometime at around April of last year, I think. April of this year. There was quite a bit of discussion about how the MOU was to proceed. And basically, as it says in the memo, there's two parts. There's the MOU, and then there's a protocol between all of the local area municipalities, the region, and the NPCA. And then there was a separate agreement that was called the protocol between the region and the NPCA. And the discussions that area planners had was that the outcome of the protocol basically had an impact on how the memorandum of understanding would move forward, because that would influence a lot of other processes. So the discussion at that time was to look at preparing the protocol first and getting sort of the terms of that understood. And then once that the terms of the protocol was understood, then we could put our minds to the MOU, which has a lot more processes in it, of which the services identified in the protocol are part of that process.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I understood there was a number of meetings that were planned and canceled at the last minute, et cetera. So that's why I was surprised to see this come forward this fall, sort of as a very emergency item. So what does this do? I mean, council spoke about this. I spoke about it at council, and then it was referred here 2 meetings ago. Our last meeting, it wasn't there. It's referred here now. The concern is, and the reason why the memorandum of understanding was first in place, was to try to, and the revisions that occurred, despite the fact that some said there weren't revisions, and the revisions that occurred was to try to encourage planning that was, the region was involved sort of at a higher order. The municipalities had more responsibility. There was clearness in terms of what I said, what was called wet and green, anything wet and green. One agency would look at that. It was chosen to be the NPCA because there was some discrepancies between regional policies, or there was the potential for discrepancies, and some in the building community said, you know what, we put forward this application. We had the regional planning staff commenting on regional environmental policies say this, and then we had NPCA planning staff commenting on their policies say something totally different. So they allowed it over here and disallowed it over there. And so the idea was, and it seemed to be working very well, put it all into one area. And it seemed to have been working extremely well over the years. And in fact, in the revision that was occurring.
Right. Do you have a question, Councillor?
I may.
The
motion's on the floor.
Yes.
So I can talk to it. Thank you. And so I might have to go back. I got disrupted here, so I might have to go back.
You're going to repeat everything again?
I may.
Oh, well, that's good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the idea was that it would be better for development, faster, more consistent policies, et cetera. We've now heard that there's going to be a change in the protocol, and we also, I believe, heard, although we haven't seen, I don't think where that came from, and I asked about this, that it be at this meeting. I haven't seen anything from the board itself at the NPCA, although I've talked to a representative there who said that it was possibly through the budget process. So I would like to see that, where the board said, we'd like to get out of this business.
I think it was in the weekly distribution.
Oh, it was?
The minutes,
Okay, I'll
yes.
take a look. So my question is, what about the wet and green? Are we going to have the potential for inconsistencies? One person here at the region, or however many people looking at the regional policies for environment, and the NPCA is going to continue with their responsibilities? Is that where we're at? And where are we right now while this process unfolds?
Right. Thank you for your question. Director Giles? Oh,
Maybe
Lena?
I'll take a stab
Yes.
at it, and through you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Giles can supplement my comments. But basically, if I could go back a little bit in history, about 10 years ago, the region adopted its natural heritage policies. I think it was Amendment 183, 187. And those were incorporated into the regional official plan. At that time, a decision was made that the administration of those policies would be done by the Conservation Authority on behalf of the region. So what's happened over the years is that the Conservation Authority attends pre-consultation meetings, and they essentially are the interpreters of regional, big R regional, natural heritage policies. And they've been doing that quite effectively. There's always hiccups, but I would say that they've been doing quite an effective job at providing that service to both the regional staff and our private sector clients in the development industry. Now with them sort of moving away from that, because that was an optional service, really, that the Conservation Authority provided for us. It's not obligatory for the Conservation Authority to do that on behalf of the region. It's actually, in most jurisdictions, a service that's provided by the regional staff, by the regional planning service is really ultimately the office that's accountable for the interpretation of regional planning policy, and that includes natural heritage policy. So since they're divesting themselves of that service, we are going to be providing it, absorbing it, and we're basically ramping up. That's why we're moving forward very quickly with the protocol, because that's the building block for the provision of this service. And then derivative of that is the update to the MOU. The MOU has to be updated because it references the fact that the Conservation Authority provides commentary and interpretation of regional natural heritage policy. Since they're not doing that, then we have to update the MOU. We feel it's a good opportunity to sort of clean it up, kind of refine some processes, and maybe discuss with the area planners what is better suited as regional high-value planning versus things that they can do at an administrative level, at the local level, that they actually are more effective at doing than we are. So that's how this is moving forward. In the interim, what you're going to see is a business case come forward through the budget process for, because of course, we're able to interpret the policies, but it's a question of resources at this point. So you'll see a business case come forward through the budget process for the additional staff resources to administer this, which is basically equivalent to what the Conservation Authority resources were, now to be housed here at the region. And is there anything else? There's the business case. And then coming, and we'll be reporting on this as we move forward, as we normally do. I think your question was also who's providing the comments right now. So the Conservation Authority still is supportive. What we're finding is that there's an increasing delay in their ability to comment. I mean, it's just getting a little bit longer. Whereas they were quite timely. Now they're, a week or so behind, 10 days behind. We think that that might grow a little bit, which is why we're moving fairly quickly to absorb that. I'm not concerned that we'll be at a point where no comments will be available, because our staff, we do have staff that are able to interpret natural heritage policy. If we're in a crunch, we can seek out specialists through a consulting service to support that. And
Thank
I
you
hope
very
that
much, Madam Chair.
answers
So,
the question.
just to that, a couple of questions. So, the commissioner said that the NPCA is doing it now, but there's a delay. So they are adhering to the MOU, and it is in the memorandum of understanding, right? So they are adhering to the MOU despite staff changes or whatever it is they
So
did.
despite, through you, Madam Chair, despite the administrative modifications there, they are continuing to support our pre-consultation process. Maybe not in person, but our planners consult with them, get the information, present that to the applicant at pre-consultation. If there's a need for a follow-up letter or comments, they're providing that. As I said, they're not as timely as they were, but they're not impacting the approval process in any way at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. I think this council would want to know if there are delays and if development applications are delayed as a result of anything. And so perhaps the commissioner can bring a report back to us at our next meeting at some of those times, in terms of, I know we look at them locally, but we need to know and understand that there are those delays happening. We keep saying around this table that we want development to occur, we want development in a timely manner. Obviously, we have to adhere to the policies, but all of a sudden, one party in a many-party memorandum of understanding made a change, and that's affected the other partners. So I think this council needs to know about this, other than simply in a received memo. What was the other one? Oh, so it is in the MOU. And the final thing is one of the options that the commissioner, he said we can do it now, and I just wondered, I did think about this, that there's probably a number of folks out there with their shingle out, that they could do these policies, and maybe a few more than there were a few weeks ago. Is it possible that this can be contracted out to a firm? Are you looking at that as an option?
We are looking at that as an option. I would say through our initial consultation with other jurisdictions, what seems to be the best practice is a blended service where you have internal staff, regional staff, that kind of process the majority of applications, but then you get very complex applications,
right,
or you run into peaks in the development cycle, and so there's a relationship with specialists, consulting specialists to support our commenting process. So I would envision, again, probably a blended service of some kind, like a base level from regional staff with the top up from a consulting agency.
Okay, thank you. The final, I'm pleased to hear that. And the final question, Madam Chair, is I did look at the last 3 correspondence rounds. I didn't see anything there, so perhaps clerk's office can send me the correspondence.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm sure they will. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I must thank staff, Mr. Giles and Mr. Mustachi, for a very thorough and detailed report. I think it does accurately reflect both the history and the intentions, and I think it's very well done. And I'd like to say that it's nice to hear something good about the Conservation Authority in terms of doing an effective job over the last number of years. I think there's an opportunity through this to improve that one window effect, in that planning won't be waiting for a comment from the Conservation Authority. And that was I think where the intent is here, that the comment on a planning issue will come from the planning, and it's truly more of a one window than it was. And so I look forward to the discussion. I think it's a very thorough report. And I just wanted to add, I see in the recommendation circulated to the Niagara home builders, which is really about residential subdivisions. I'd like you to add the Niagara Industrial Association, because this policy would have significant effect on many industrial, commercial properties around the region.
Great, thank you, Councillor.
And perhaps the Hamilton home builders, because we do have a sizable chunk under the authority, but I think we don't have an agreement with Hamilton on this scale. So if you could just add the Niagara Industrial Association, that'd be great.
I'm sure they'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Nunziata?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a few questions, but a small commentary. So the MOU and the related protocols have succeeded as tools. And we've relied upon them to manage relationships, to reduce duplication, and certainly facilitate continuous improvement within our planning processes. That is the role of the MOU. And every now and then we have to update that to make sure that we are following a process that allows for efficiency, that allows for compliance, and that certainly aligns with fairness and equity. So I have no doubt that the region would love for the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority to continue on with these services. But that leads to my questions. So for further clarification, the roles and responsibilities under review are mandated by the Niagara region, correct?
We're speaking about regional official plan policy. So they are policies and bylaws, regulations that are adopted by this council.
Correct, okay. So the guiding principle of these discussions has always been that whoever owns the policy is in the best position to regulate the policy. Is that correct? Or to enforce it?
I would say there's a greater sense of accountability when that's the model of administration. I think if you go back 10 years to when 187 was adopted, I don't know what the thinking was at the time, but there was probably an assumption made that there was some expertise at the Conservation Authority, so why duplicate it here? But if that's changing, then that expertise simply moves in-house at the region and we become the policy administrators. It's simply of who's providing the service, one agency or another.
That's a great point. So to take it a step further then, no refinements or changes, and this is just to put an end to the narrative that's being created or crafted that somehow the NPCA is shirking their responsibility. So I want to be perfectly clear. No refinements or changes to the MOU or its related protocols in any way lessen obligations with respect to environmental or watershed protection.
No, in fact, through you, Madam Chair, we're quite confident that we'll be able to administer all of the requisite policies and regulations, given the resources which I'm confident Regional Council will provide us, that we'll be able to administer, and there'll be no deterioration, if you will, of the mandate that you've just referenced.
Okay, so to be certain then, all relevant provincial policy, all relevant provincial legislation still applies to all parties coming forward in the development process. Thank you. One last question. To your point, in your opinion, does the expertise then in administering the policies of the region, does that lie within organizations or does that rely within individuals?
I think it follows the individual. Where I think, and I'll be frank here, where regional planning staff and certainly the local planners are on side is that there's the technical point of it, there's a technical aspect of the interpretation, and then there's the accountability aspect. And what we're hearing from our local planning partners is that they would like the accountability for regional policies to reside at the region. They're very clear about that. And so that is a fundamental principle that we're moving forward with under the protocol and the MOU.
And one last point, the NPCA has brought down its timing and turnaround for permits from 31 days down to 17 days. So we have been very proactive in managing our expectations on our end. Do you foresee an impact moving forward under this potential new model? Do you see increased turnaround, or do you see more thickening of the process and more bureaucracy and more red tape that would cause more days and more time delays?
Again, through you, Madam Chair, and I respect the efforts and the improvements that the Conservation Authority have made. That's an average number. I would expect that overall we'll definitely be striving to maintain that turnaround time. That's important to all of our clients, both at the local level and in the industry. And that's why I suggested that there might be a blended model for very complex applications, which take longer to review and to provide commentary on. But I don't see a downside in terms of we recognize time is money, and we will endeavor to get the comments out as required by our private sector clients.
Okay, and that's all the question I had. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was up early reading this. I'm not sure exactly when I got all the documents. There's quite a few. Now, I remember, and some of around the table do remember when this happened. And the exact arguments I'm hearing for this uploading were the identical words that we used for downloading the responsibilities to the local municipalities and the NPCA. By all accounts, back then, maybe it isn't the same anymore, it was working well. And I'm not sure what changes are being made. I think we authorized some form of communication or negotiation, and has that been going on? Have we been having negotiations? We talked about this a couple of meetings ago. So have you been meeting with the NPCA and looking at their wishes, their budget, what they expect from us? I heard reference the other night about we'll be putting on the Balls Falls thing, the annual, sort of signature piece of the NPCA is now going to be the responsibility of the region and the region alone. Is that so? I don't know. Has there been negotiation is the question.
Through you, Madam Chair, the only conversation that we've been having with the Conservation Authority is related to the administration of our planning policies. There's nothing operational here that is under discussion. We're not assuming any operational responsibilities of the Conservation Authority. Even from a regulatory perspective, it's pretty precise in terms of what is coming back to the region as opposed to what's staying with the Conservation Authority. So watershed planning as required by the Conservation Authorities Act, the administration of permitting, that is a function of the regulations, Conservation Authority regulations, that's staying with the Conservation Authority. All we're talking about here are regional planning policies.
And that's what I'm talking about. I was asking if there's been negotiation. I guess the answer is no. But there was reference to that one event, and I appreciate that an organization wants to get down to their core values. And certainly it'll reflect in their budget. That'll be, will they still be a commenting agency as it relates to policy with the province?
So whenever there's, through you, Madam Chair, whenever there's an application for development, and let's pick a subdivision, there's regional policies that speak to, you know, our requirements with respect to locally significant wetlands, buffers, habitat, etc. And then there's regulatory requirements from the Conservation Authority through the Conservation Authorities Act. So those are still regulated by the Conservation Authority. So if there's a Conservation Authority interest, they will still provide the comment, the commentary on matters within their mandate.
Okay, so we'll just two of us doing it now instead of two organizations, it would appear, instead of one. We're honoring our obligation. We thought we did it a good way to avoid duplication because sometimes they're at odds. It was referenced earlier, and indeed it is from time to time. I'm just trying to get some clarity because I have none. I hear things in the hallway and I don't have a report in front of me. What do you think are the budgetary implications here or the operational implications? I've heard additional staff, I've heard that. Considerable or do we need a staff to put this event on if indeed we're going to be have the responsibility for that event? I just don't know, and I'm looking for, do we just say, okay, you want to do this, we'll just take back what we used to have? I know it's our responsibility and we have to acknowledge it, but carry on, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure what the event you're speaking about.
What's it called? The water project, isn't that?
That's not planning, but.
Yeah. Mr. CEO?
Well, the report before you is on the planning issues, as the commissioner has been discussing. Just to comment on that through you, Chair, to committee, it's not always automatic. There's times where the NPCA, when I was the CEO of the NPCA, we're interpreting regional policies and regional staff were saying, you're not interpreting our policies correctly. So it wasn't always smooth, but we were able to resolve those differences on items case by case. So it's not a duplication of effort because there's two fundamental instruments. The first instrument is the region's official plan and their environmental policy. That's one instrument. The second instrument is the Conservation Authorities Act. So it's clear the mandate of the Conservation Authority is their provincial requirements under that instrument. The region's instrument, the environmental policies, it's been communicated to us from the NPCA that they're not interested in delivering that service to us. That is the facilitation of what is being brought for you today. So we're now preparing a plan on how to address that issue that the NPCA is divesting out of commenting on our environmental policies in that agreement. You are correct. There's other things that they've communicated to us, and one is the Children's Water Festival. So Public Works and the Commissioner Ron Tripp and his team are going to be assuming the responsibility of the Children's Water Festival, and you got those numbers. The other service, there's two additional services, and one is the NPCA is still doing our regional tree bylaw, tree enforced bylaw, and that hasn't been determined, but what they've indicated, they still may be interested in doing that, but they don't want it as a levy issue. They'd like it as a regular invoicing issue. They'll invoice us rather than put in an attachment on their levy. We're still in discussion with that. So to provide you clarity, there is the tree enforced bylaw, there's a Children's Water Festival, and then there's the planning issue. There's one more. There's a fourth issue, and they do provide us with water quality analysis, and we've been funding that. We believe that the water quality team at the Conservation Authority they have set up, they do it for the province, they do it for us, they do it for the federal government, they also do it for some landfills. So there's some efficiencies in that they are the primary to do those water quality testing.
So they want on a fee-for-service basis, and I'll be the end of it. So I'll look forward to the clarity from staff, because it's still not here. But,
right. All this is not a planning issue, right? Commissioner, do you have any comment?
Well, and again, the report from our vantage point speaks exclusively to the planning issues. We're not getting, the protocol and the MOU do not speak to the water festival or water quality testing or the tree bylaw enforcement.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you, Chair, and it's embarrassing, but once again, everybody's taken up my questions. I'm starting to get a little annoyed about this because I don't get to talk, but thank you.
Oh, well, thank you anyway. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize if a couple of these questions were asked earlier or mentioned, but one of the commentary I would just put around this MOU discussion is I wear two hats. As you know, I'm the budget chair at the MPCA. I also sit here as a regional councillor. And when we looked at the programs that the MPCA offers to the region, there's actually 5. There's the 4 that are included in the special levy, and then we also invoice the town for the management of the regional beach. So we were talking about those services. As budget chair, I said it doesn't make sense to include them as the special levy if they are services that we are providing exclusively to Niagara region, and they're not services that we would normally apply to the other ones that should be actually invoiced for those services, and that's what started the discussion. The other thing that comes out of that is because it's on the special levy, the cost is borne directly by the taxpayers. It's a flow through from the region. So because of that, the actual direct costs associated with those programs in total are less than what we get from the special levy. We actually allocate certain costs for the administration. For example, with our tree bylaw, we have a fixed cost for the bylaw enforcement officer, his salary. We also have a cost for a vehicle that he uses, but we also allocate a certain amount of costs for his manager, his direct reports, operations at the Conservation Authority. So that profit, if you will, is also being allocated on the special levy. So as a regional councillor, I'm worrying about the taxpayers of Niagara. That is money that is offsetting our general levy costs, and by default, reducing the costs that are being borne by Hamilton and Haldimand. So once again, by doing it the way it was being done, we were unfairly subsidizing our operations for Hamilton and Haldimand. So by making it a direct invoice for services, it's much cleaner. It protects the taxpayers with more transparency with the services that we're providing, and it makes sure that within the special levy and the general levy are only those programs that are required by the mandate of the Conservation Authority. If at the end of the negotiations, the region and the MPCA decide that they want to still have the region do the bylaw, tree bylaw, they still want us to do the water quality, those 2 services will be invoiced directly to the region, much like the invoice you get for managing the regional beach, and those will be included in the budget for revenue items, and we'll deal with them accordingly. With respect to planning, I think it makes more sense from what I've heard with our conversations with the development community that those specific policies be brought back in-house here at the region, because it's best for the region to interpret regional policies rather than be at odds with conservation staff on issues that are outside the mandate of the Conservation Authority.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any issue with the transferring of planning services from NPCA to the Niagara region. I hear the logic behind it makes some sense. I guess my only concern is, and in this regard, I want to think of the taxpayers. When services are transferred, there's resources, and we heard from the commissioner that we will be receiving a business case for added resources that the region will require to do the services that are being transferred. So what I'm hoping is that on behalf of the taxpayers, who we don't want to make and turn into big losers here, there will be an offsetting reduction in the levy request from the NPCA to compensate for those resources that the region are now going to have to provide. And anything less than equivalence makes the taxpayer a big loser.
Right. The Commissioner has a comment.
That's a very important principle, and I thank Councillor Hodgson for bringing that up. So what you'll see, if I could forecast the business case, is definitely there's currently a transfer that goes to the Conservation Authority, which will no longer happen. So that's part of the math as far as the financial side. In addition, the conservation, this is not a free service. So the Conservation Authority has a fee structure for the provision of comments in support of development applications. So we will be asking regional council to make a corresponding adjustment to our fees so that we capture that fee revenue. The intent is that the transfer and the staffing here, the resourcing, that it be revenue neutral in terms of the fees that we collect and the opportunity of not sending over the funds to the Conservation Authority. So there'll be a balance. It may take a year or two to get it just right, but that's the principle.
Thank you. Councillor Easton?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to the Commissioner, Madam Chair, you know, the pedagogy around planning for decades has just overwhelmed all of us. There's no question about it. And I had no idea how, and I won't use the word unique, but it was just that we had a policy here in Niagara that didn't exist anywhere else in the province. And I was at a committee meeting with municipalities that deal with a lot of sand and gravel issues. And this topic came up. And my response to them was, well, what about the responsibility of the Conservation Authority? And they're glazing over. I'm trying to explain to them. And they said, oh, no. And one of the mayors said to me, that's just in Niagara because you people don't know what you're doing. That's actually what she said to me. So I think that there's a very, very, you know, I'll use the word pedagogy because sometimes, you know, I think that there were just layers of policy put on because it was believed that municipalities couldn't really do anything in a reliable way on their own. But I think that we're really beyond that, and I am very pleased that this is now focused, that the relationship that LAMs have with the regional planning department can be used to the benefit of the consumer, and that the customer will receive the focus and they will get the service they deserve, that is consistent interpretation and timely response.
Right.
That's what we have with everything else that the Conservation Authority is not involved in, and so that is what the expectation will be in the future. My question, though, to Commissioner Mustachi is there, or maybe I'm reading too much into this, but has the coordinated review had any influence at all in the decision to move in this direction? Because it would seem to me that that entire rationalization of all the services certainly had to have, there had to be a message in there that, yes, an aha moment, you people do know what you're talking about. This layer is not needed. Expertise can be wherever it's required. Do you have any comment on that at all?
Through you, Madam Chair, again, excellent observation. I would say that the update to the growth plan is a significant driver in redefining what regional planning is and what our role should be in support of local communities. So, you know, it's much more prescriptive in terms of what the province's expectations are for land budgeting, for various components of the growth plan, and we're now very much part of that. We're right in the mix. As you know, we debated this through the MCR process, et cetera. So, you know, it's resulted in a refocusing of really what the regional planning focus should be. Again, from my vantage point, what I see is that the local communities are more and more, and as development increases across the region, they're more and more strapped to provide development approval services. You know, the rezonings, the committee of adjustment, the land division activities, the zoning updates, the rezoning. So most of the local municipalities in Niagara are completely consumed by that, and they're just barely getting along. So the larger policy issues, the larger policy analysis, long-term growth management, they have no capacity to do that. And what they're saying is that, region, please do that for us. We have to do that for them. We're helping out the township of West Lincoln. As you know, we're supporting the town of Lincoln, city of Welland, across the region. We're actually adjusted our work program to be much more supportive of policy initiatives at the local level.
And Madam Chair, I would say that this in no way should be interpreted that local area planning departments are not well-educated and do not have the professional capacity, because that is not the issue.
No.
This is just merely a matter of that there are certain things that should be developed
At the
here
regional
and
level.
administered here, and we need to be left to spend that time understanding and interpreting what is best in our communities. And I think that division of work is going to be very, very important. And then when the Conservation Authority needs to be involved, of course, they will be there with their very special expertise in terms of watershed. But I'm sorry that, I really regret that there has been so much negative talk about this, because I think that this is a watershed moment. And this is moving local planning up to a level that is going to really serve our communities well in the future.
Right.
So I'm pleased that I'm pleased with your answer, and I look forward to much smoother sailing.
Right. Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor. Councillor Maves.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I concur with Councillor Easton's comments. One of the things that's confusing for planning departments, lawyers, consultants, developers, small business people just trying to add an addition or something is we have so many rules and regulations when you're putting up a building. And they're municipal, and there's region, and there's NPCA, and there's the province, and it goes on and on. And it's hard enough for people to know all of the rules and regulations they're guided by, and the fees and charges and so on and so forth, and what comes first and what are the processes, that they just turn it over to their consultant. But then when we start mixing jurisdictions, this is the region's jurisdiction, oh, but the region doesn't administer it, or it's crazy. So if the process is going to kind of sort that out and streamline it and make it clean and easy and understandable, lawyers will make less, and some consultants will make less, and the business person who's making the investment will actually have more money in their pockets at the end of the day to make the investment. That's a good thing. So I agree with Councillor Easton. I think this is long overdue, and it's very appropriate. While you're at it, I have to get back quickly on a soapbox. That when I chaired the NPCA, one of the problems I saw early on was with our pre-consultation process. And in theory, the NPCA, the region, and the municipality will meet with someone who's going to build a dentist's office. I'm going to use an example. And they'll talk, and they get this 11 by 17 list of all of these things that the person might have to do, archaeological studies and site plans and parking and traffic studies and so on and so forth. And they sit around the table and then they just start checking boxes. And then at the end of the meeting, they say, see you in 2 years, because those studies are going to take 2 years for someone to do, and it's going to cost a lot of money for someone to get all these studies done.
Right.
So we talked about, and I talked to Patrick Robson and Mary Lou Tanner, and I've talked to the planner at the City of Niagara Falls and other planners about taking this pre-consultation process and try to get some dedicated people who are always the ones from the NPCA, from the region, and maybe get 1 or 2 represent most of the municipalities who now become very adept at doing pre-consultation meetings. And instead of showing up with 11 by 17 piece of foolscap, checking boxes about what you have to do, start saying, okay, you don't have to do this in my municipality, parking and traffic study, because someone put a building up right next door to you last year, and we have their parking and traffic study. Start crossing stuff off that they don't have to do. So it takes coordination and agreement between the 2 levels of government and the multiple municipalities and yourself and the NPCA. But it would make life so much easier, and people would appreciate it so much to go into a room and have people say, no, you don't have to do that. Really quick, and you give an example of a dentist's office. It was a lady who was a dentist in Welland. She was trying to build a dentist's office in Niagara Lake. She had her pre-consultation meeting. She's a dentist. She runs her business every day. She looks in people's mouths. She's not a developer. So she has a pre-consultation meeting, and they're telling her, get a site plan and some architect's drawings. So she gets the site plan and an architect's drawing and gives it to the municipality. The municipality then says, well, you got to run this by the region and the NPCA. The region says, the MP says, no, there's a creek back there. You're going to have to turn your building and move it this way, and so on and so forth. She goes and gets the drawings redone. She then takes the drawings to the region, and the region says, no, 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 you just moved the building into our road allowance. She has to go back for multiple drawings, and finally, I was asked to assist, and I just said to everyone, could you guys just get together and tell her where you want her building and how you want to situate it, and let her get one final drawing, and that's it. And I think that if those people got in a room together, the staff, at the outset, and say, let's solve the problems for these people, instead of sending them on multiple goose chases and multiple studies and so on and so forth. I think that's the reduction of red tape that we really need to lead on. And so, Reno, while you're at the table with all these people, I'm hoping you can maybe move that forward.
Right.
We will.
And
Thank
when
you.
was that, Counselor, that happened? Can you tell us? It's a little off topic, but it's an important conversation.
In the previous term of council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
2010 to 14 was when that happened.
Okay.
That's that specific example.
It's fixed. Okay, thank you very much for that. Seeing no other comments or people wish to speak, I'm asking, we have a mover and a seconder. All in favor of these three reports? Any opposed? And it's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And I will call Mr. Piccioni, please, to the podium.
You want to take a bit of a recess?
Oh, right. Why don't we, would you like that? Would you like a 5-minute recess before we go into DCs?
Yes, I have to declare the conflict and.
All right, well, you can do that anyway. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute recess. I mean 5 minutes, though. Like 2:58:30. Okay, members of the committee, if you take your places, please. And Mr. Piccioni, if you can come forward. Thank you. We have quorum. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentlemen, please. We have. I know I'm so gentle and quiet. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to speak to you regarding a request on behalf of my clients, Lozani Homes and Mars Homes, with respect to some revisions that were made to the previously adopted development charges bylaw. As per the October 23rd letter that we've submitted and that I understand you all have copies of. More specifically, we're requesting 8 specific wording changes that were made to the previously adopted bylaw be returned back to what they were in that bylaw. My clients are concerned that these revisions may negatively impact their ability to secure their transition provision agreements, which are still outstanding, and also their ability, and especially their ability, to have certainty with respect to future brownfield redevelopment projects that they are considering in Niagara. In fact, one of my clients is currently considering a major brownfield redevelopment project in Niagara. And these revisions that were made to the previously adopted bylaw are seriously impacting their ability to possibly go ahead with that project. Now, I want to be clear, the revisions that are requested in my letter on behalf of my clients are only to make changes to the DC rules for brownfield redevelopment and transition provisions, changes that were made from the previously adopted bylaw to go back to the previous wording, okay? It's a pretty simple request. And if that wording was good enough a couple of months ago for staff, for Corporate Services Committee, and for Council to adopt, why isn't it good enough now? What changed? Now, the stated rationale for the revisions that have been made that we have an issue with is to introduce clarity and transparency. And in some cases, the revisions that were made to the previously adopted bylaw did that, and we have no concern or issue with those revisions. What we have a problem with is the revisions to the rules for development charge reduction for brownfields and the transition provision, specifically the 8 that we've identified, because those changes actually reduce clarity and transparency and certainty. And I've used the term certainty before when I presented to Corporate Services Committee and Council. What the wording revisions that have been made that we have an issue with do is they basically give the regions sole and unfettered discretion to decide what is an eligible brownfield and what are eligible brownfield remediation costs. In a couple of instances, the changes that have been made don't even make sense, and they actually exclude costs that should be eligible. In one case, environmental studies, testing, and analysis is actually excluded as an eligible remediation cost. That's impossible. How could that be excluded? In a couple of other cases, the revisions just don't make sense. So we compare that to the previously adopted development charge bylaw that spends 6.5 pages defining what is a brownfield and what are eligible remediation costs. There is no other development charge bylaw in Ontario that devotes that much ink and paper to specifically defining what's an eligible cost and what's an eligible brownfield. It's pretty clear in there, and it's pretty clear from my clients what they can expect to get money back for and when and how, and what they can't. So again, why these extra revisions? The question is there. Now, my clients and I, on behalf of my clients, we made numerous written submissions. We made numerous presentations to Corporate Services Committee, to the Development Charges Policy Task Force, to Council. We met with staff twice. Nobody's been here more on behalf of my clients than we have, okay? And after all of that, and after the bylaw was adopted and we thought everything had been decided, the bylaw was changed. And neither I or my clients was directly notified of that. Now, if this had been a planning application, we would have been automatically notified that there had been some changes, but we weren't, and that's fine. That can happen. What my clients are concerned about and why I'm here today is really the revisions identified in our letter. Now, we worked diligently with the region to arrive at a DC bylaw that included rules for brownfields development charge reduction, that included a transition provision, that was acceptable to my clients and gave them the very minimum amount of clarity and certainty they needed to complete their current brownfield redevelopment projects, evaluate and hopefully take on more brownfield redevelopment projects in Niagara, and not appeal the development charges bylaw. Well, now that clarity and certainty has been eroded because of these most recent revisions. Let me give you an analogy. With a brownfield redevelopment project, my clients are taking a huge risk. There's already a lot of uncertainty. Imagine you're buying your forever home, and that's a big investment for most people. You have a purchase and sale agreement. You as the purchaser have signed it, the vendor signed it. And because the vendor's lawyer forgets to have the vendor initial on one line, rather than simply the lawyer coming back and saying, okay, we screwed up here, just re-sign the same agreement and we'll move forward to finalize the sale, the vendor's lawyer presents you with a new agreement that contains new terms that favor his client. How would you feel? What would you do? I suspect you'd be very disappointed, and I suspect your inclination would be to walk away from the deal and maybe sue the vendor and his lawyer. That's not what my clients want to do. Okay, what we want to do is just deal with the revisions that have been made that we have an issue with, not all of them. We're not asking you to turn the clock back and go back to the exact wording on everything that was in bylaw 2017-68, which council did adopt. What we did was we took the time to go through all the revisions that were made, and we identified only those that my clients cannot live with. And that's 8 revisions, taking it back to the wording in the previously adopted bylaw. Now, I note that I did reach out to staff to see if they wanted to discuss these revisions, and they respectfully declined. My clients are not asking for much here, just a return to the previously adopted wording on the brownfield development charge rules and the transition provisions. Wording that was already approved and adopted by council. Okay? So none of the revisions we're requesting give the region any less power or discretion than what was approved in the previously adopted bylaw. The revisions put the clarity and the certainty that my clients need back into the bylaw like it was before. And in conclusion, my clients are requesting that this committee pass a motion directing that the development charges bylaw be revised to incorporate all the revisions as presented in our October 23rd letter verbatim. If that happens, my clients will be satisfied. That's it for my presentation. If you have any questions,
So what you're asking for is to go back to the bylaw that we passed in August, is
No, what we're asking for is that the specific revisions in our letter of October 23rd be made to the bylaw that you have before you now. So a few of the revisions that were put into the previously adopted bylaw actually have the stated effect to improve clarity and certainty. The ones that don't make sense are the 8 that we've identified in here. So as long as you make the revisions in that letter verbatim, and I've done a red line revision, it's very clear what needs to happen. We provided a rationale even for every single change. That will satisfy my client.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions or comments for the presenter, Councillor Maves?
Yeah, were the revisions in your letter that you sent in October ever accepted verbatim and included in the DC bylaw presented to council or committee verbatim?
No. No, the chronology on this is that when the previous bylaw 2017-68 was adopted, we thought this was done. Okay? These revisions that we are objecting to were introduced after that bylaw was adopted. Okay? And then are being presented to you now as the new bylaw should be adopted because the previous one, there were some timeline and irregularities around the process. Okay? We weren't contacted and said, hey, we're making changes. We didn't know about it. I found out about it by accident, quite frankly. Okay, so I wasn't contacted on behalf of my clients, and my clients weren't directly contacted.
Okay, I'm sorry, it may be me, but I'm confused that if they were never in the bylaw, you're asking us to just accept, like a lot of people will make presentations on what they want into a DC bylaw, and the staff can look at them and decide we don't want them in the bylaw.
Okay.
You're making it sound like they were in the bylaw, they agreed to put those all in the bylaw, and then somewhere along the line we pulled them out. But they were never agreed to and put in the bylaw in the first place.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. And let me clarify. We worked diligently with staff, made presentations, and a bylaw was presented to Corporate Services Committee, a DC bylaw that we were satisfied with. And Corporate Services Committee adopted that bylaw, that went to council, council adopted the bylaw, okay? It was then discovered, after that bylaw was adopted, that there was an irregularity in the issuance of a notice, and therefore the region did not meet the prescribed regulation for adopting a bylaw. So then staff decided, let's re-adopt this bylaw. But they didn't decide to re-adopt the same bylaw. And I don't know if it was staff, I don't know who it is, I'm not pointing any fingers, changes were made to the previously adopted bylaw. We have a problem with those changes. So we didn't make those changes.
Oh, yeah, I got
They were made at the region's end, and we're just asking that some of those be put back the way we were, and we provided that wording. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. That's my questions for the presenter, Chair. I'd like to know staff's rationale at some point in time for why they altered that previously passed bylaw. We can do that now, or we can wait till other people ask their questions. It's
Through the chair, that is correct. When we went to fix some of the changes that, when we re-looked at the bylaw and we went to fix some of the changes, we went through an additional legal review. So we had an additional lawyer involved in it. And when we had another reading of it, and you have to remember, we're in discussions not with just Lucha's two clients, but with other developers who also ask other questions, who we also have to address. And based upon other input that was received, plus based upon our internal and external legal counsel's review of it, they recommended additional changes to it. And it was presented as a brand new bylaw. And that's how it was presented. So essentially the process restarted again as the bylaw, and council can make the decisions on wording at that point in time. We have our external legal counsel here who was part of the review of why some of those changes were made and what some of the rationale was for that. But it was, the rationale behind it was mostly around ensuring that we had strong bylaw language in the bylaw that we could defend both from our internal legal counsel and our external legal counsel was comfortable with it.
okay. So at some point in time, Chair, today, will we get on the screen the alterations?
Those 8 changes?
The explanation why and the impacts of.
Right, because I'm thinking that what Mr. Piccioni would suggest is the 8 changes that he would like to see go back to the original. Is that correct? Of those 8 issues. Would they make material difference? And I'm going to ask Commissioner Burgess. If we went back to the original, how would that affect us?
Sorry, through the chair, and if I screw anything up, I can have outside legal counsel correct me. Most of the issues relate to as brownfield development credit program. And the issue there, it's a discretionary program. It's a discretionary program that council approves. It's not part of the legislation. And the wording that was put in there was to ensure that council had retained its powers, frankly, on those discretionary credits, so that the taxpayer is not unduly burdened by any changes. So you could argue, you can use the term, that it leaves it up to the region to decide, but it's really council's decision. It's not a staff decision, it's a council decision. And so the wording was the preferred wording of legal counsel, so that this council could protect itself from its or not protect itself from its bylaw, but ensure it has appropriate measures to use the bylaw effectively. And that is the essence of most of the issues here. It's whether we want to retain certain rights under discretionary programs and retain those rights with council.
Thank you, Commissioner Burgess. We have another question, Councilor Campion.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to the presenter. Lucia, we had a discussion just before the meeting when you were sitting out there. And I wondered, I didn't get a chance to ask this question, but I'll ask it now. You've obviously gone through the agenda. The City of Welland has suggested some amendments to the bylaw. I think you're aware that I've dropped number 1 and taken industrial equals 000 out of section 2. I'm wondering though if you could comment on the other recommendation, particularly the ones relating to brownfields. If we're successful, in having these amendments made, how would that affect your position? This is the best way to put it.
Through you, Madam Chair, if the revisions being requested by the City of Welland are made, my clients have no objection to those revisions, because basically that takes us back to where we were, and it doesn't change some of the other good things that have been put in the bylaw, like the ability to get an extension on a demolition credit from 5 years to 8 years if it's a brownfield site. Our concern, and as stated by Mr. Burgess, is that we had an adopted bylaw that took over a year to be developed. There was all kinds of opportunity for the region to ask for outside legal counsel, and that only happened after a procedural faux pas reopened the bylaw. I'm sorry, that's offside. It's way offside.
Okay.
And the rules are being changed, the terms are being changed, and my clients have a problem with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Piccioni. I'm going to ask the committee, what is your pleasure? Do you want to go through these 8 changes now? Do you want to wait until the presentation by the commissioner, which is next up? What's the pleasure of the committee? Anyone?
Have staff had the opportunity to look at the
They have.
revisions, and you've come to the conclusion that it's not acceptable? And we know the consequences of leaving it the way it is.
Yes, one moment. And some of the responses are in the commissioner.
Maybe I'll go.
Yes, so let's do the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Piccioni, very much. So we're going to have a presentation by the commissioner at this point, and some of the answers will be there, some of them won't. And then we can decide how we want to handle it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. CAO. Because we need all the help we can get. Welcome, Commissioner. We expect you to straighten this whole thing out for us.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, if you recall, the approach to this was when it was discussed at, I believe it was at council, at the last council meeting, the direction was to refer, because there were a number of questions, to refer those questions to Planning Committee for further discussion and review. So, Madam Chair, if you recall, you sent out a couple messages to the members of council asking them to get their questions in by last Friday in order for us to adequately take a look at them and respond. So that's what we've done. We did receive some questions. We also reviewed the tape of the meeting, and we pulled out a couple questions that came out from the members of council at the meeting, and we tried to provide a response. Some of those cover the items identified by Mr. Piccioni, but you may still want to go through his submission individually. So I'll just start with the first slide. Okay, so we did receive a question, and I'll just read the question and the response, and then and there's probably a half a dozen slides. Once I've gone through, perhaps we can have a Q&A. So one of the questions was, would it be possible for you to request that staff direct councillors to the report that contains the DC study report and the list of capital projects that underpin the rates or recirculate copies of the same? And the response that we developed is The DC background study lists all the projects for which there is the potential DC recoverable cost. See Section 5 of the report, and we provided the web link to the full report. Each project outlines the expected timing of the project, the estimated cost, less post-period benefit, and benefit to existing and other deductions prior to determining the DCable amount. The first background study is from April 2017, earlier this year, in addition to an updated version from October. The link to this information was provided, and this was previously also sent out to all councillors on October 29th, 2017. The next question was, how much do we need to collect in DC charges in the next 10 years? And how much less by passing all the amendments that are being proposed? So the response is the growth capital projection for the next 10 years as per the DC background study is $599 million, as identified in the table below, approximate. Based on the residential and non-residential growth forecast, estimated development charges to be collected over the next 10 years are approximately $460 million. And with respect to the reductions, this table identifies the potential reduction opportunity cost as a result of some of the proposed changes. The changes are listed on the left, and the lost revenue, if you will, is projected out to 2022. The next question, because this has changed so much through the process, may I suggest that a presentation to committee about where we now stand for key components like agriculture, brownfields, industrial DCs, hotels, multi-residential, commercial, residential, etc. And what we did is we provided a summary of all the changes within the slide deck, as well as we attached the full table of changes at the end of the presentation. So we could go through these now, or we can chat about them later, but as you can see, there were a number of modifications made with respect to the definitions to provide further clarity. And the revisions are separated by time. So we have revisions made prior to July 20th, 2017, and changes made after July 20th, 2017. So those would be the new changes. The next question, why is a development charge credit fund required as opposed to providing exemptions directly in the bylaw? This is a common theme that has come up throughout the discussion on the development charge bylaw, and I've tried to sort of simplify it, but this is kind of how I understand it. So a fund to offset the cost of development charge rebates and exemptions is required to ensure that the DC reserve is kept whole. This also allows a more transparent budget process. Council has complete discretion to ensure that the fund is sufficient to ensure future offsetting. Otherwise, the development charge bylaw does not have a method to fund exemptions or rebates, and a methodology to do that is actually required by the Development Charges Act. Again, development charges are completely discretionary. There's communities that don't have development charges, but the cost of the infrastructure to support development would then otherwise be paid for entirely by the levy. And so what we have here is a program where infrastructure to support development has been identified. A fund has been created to offset any exemptions or rebates that the council would like to provide as incentives to development. The next question, Why do we not maintain the former policy with respect to brownfield remediation, which potentially provided an incentive greater than the cost of cleanup? And what I would say, and historically, the intent of the region's brownfield program has always been to create a level playing field. That is to have a program that allows full 100% recovery of the cost of cleanup. And that could be done through the rebate, or it could be done through other programs. There are additional regional incentive programs to further support the redevelopment of former industrial lands, such as the Smart Growth Incentive Program, and potentially, depending on where it is, tax increment grants in these instances. The next question, what is the rationale to phase in development charges for hotels? The response, previously, hotels had their own category and a dedicated rate under the development charge bylaw. The new development charge bylaw includes hotels in the standard commercial category, and this is typical within jurisdictions in the GTA. But the modification requested proposes to phase in the development charge rate for hotels from the current rate to the full commercial rate over the 5-year period, with an effort to incentivize hotels in the early part of the life of the bylaw. That's it, Madam Chair. We have some additional information that's available with respect to the rates and the changes. There's a slide that was provided with respect to the consultation and engagement process, and I'm available to respond to any questions that you or the committee may have. If I can't, I'm sure that Commissioner Burgess and finance staff can supplement my comments.
Thank you very much. There's one additional slide I'd like to have posted, which is a list of lower tier municipalities and when their bylaws come up for renewal. And we're just getting that up now.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
What is your rationale for having this slide come up?
Just to indicate that this is not the end of the increase in DCs across the region. These are also, development charges will also be increased by municipalities. I think we have to be aware of that. And they're all before 2019. So they will be working on those next year, I would think. So any questions of the Commissioner, Councillor Campion?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to restrict it to questions right now without comment. My question is, during the meeting, I spent an awful lot of time asking a series of questions regarding the DC industrial cap. And we came to the conclusion through the discussion that there is no cap. You say, or that's what staff is saying, there is no cap. Don't worry about it. You come in with an industry, you're going to get it. So my question during the meeting was, well, then why don't we just say there is no cap? And I didn't see that question answered in the presentation.
Commissioner, can you tackle that?
My understanding is that there's no predetermined cap. So what happens is that every year we budget with the expectation of how much money has to be offset as far as our development charge exemption for employment lands. And then the council deliberates that and makes a decision to include that amount in the offset reserve. That's what I call it, in the development charge fund to offset the development charge reserve.
Councillor?
Yeah, right. So I guess the question is there the assumption that there is a cap because we are creating a fund for it with a cap on the amount of funding based on how much we're allocating? How do we make it clear in the bylaw that there is no cap? We can still say we're going to set money aside, but clearly state that if someone is applying, they're going to get it. And that's our biggest problem with the industrial DCs is we can't engage somebody to come in here and say, you know, you're going to get it. Well, no, we're not. So how do we clarify that there is no cap in the bylaw?
All right, Commissioner Burgess has a comment here.
Thank you. Through the chair. The credit, like the other credit programs, are discretionary programs. And how you can gain certainty, quite frankly, is each year the estimate comes up, and if we believe that there is more then that funding can change at the discretion of council at that point in time. Additionally, anything in year, if our economic development folks or local area municipality economic development folks are out there and are prospecting and they think that they have some valued prospects, it's quite easy to come to council and say, listen, we spent X amount out of this reserve. We think we have the potential over the next year to have this much. You can get pre-approval very easily through that process, well in advance of final decisions if it's certainty that's required. What our program does, unlike other municipalities, is we actually have given our staff $1 million delegated authority to go up to $1 million for incentives. And we keep on using the term cap, but really that's funding that this council has told staff that they can go and use with certainty in negotiations. If staff requires increased certainty, it's easy for them to come in advance of council. And the process, frankly, is no different than any other local area municipality.
Thank you for that. Councillor?
Yeah, so that really skirts around the issue. And that's the explanation that I got at the council meeting. But what I'm looking for is how do we provide, I mean, we can't have somebody come in and say, listen, let's go talk about this and, this could happen or that could happen. How do I sit with a developer that comes in and says, look at, which I just did, what do you have to offer? I can say for certainty I can offer this, 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 and this, but I can't say for certain that I can offer that, the DC, because it still has to come back to council at some point if we exceed the number. So that's what I'm looking for. Is I can't promote this without doing that.
If I can,
yes.
Madam Chair, what we're talking about is not so much a financial question as a policy decision. So the policy of this council is to not have an employment development charge. That's your policy. And it's being funded through a mechanism where there's an offset to the development charge reserve. So the issue is really, is the council going to change its policy? Once you have a policy, it's incumbent on the council to make sure that you apply that policy and that you fund it. Otherwise, you're in breach of your own policy. And so the question really is, instead of deciding, are we not going to fund the offset reserve or the offset account fund, or are we going to change our policy? So you start off with the policy. I mean, as a planner, I'm saying, like, it's a question of public policy. And I don't think that the council would be changing that, arbitrarily. You can't do that.
So there is certainty.
That's, from my vantage point, that's how I see it. And I don't know how Commissioner Burgess might want to respond.
Yes.
Through the chair, we said in the bylaw, we had said that policy would exist for 5 years and be reviewed by council. So that's why, to me, we gave certainty for the 5-year period, which is the life of the bylaw. That's the policy. To me, we have a mechanism, frankly, with the funding to allow staff to make decisions, frankly, without coming back to council, to be able to have $1 million worth of delegated authority, because we believe that's an efficient method of doing it. And you can point to the policy, frankly, during that 5-year period to say that's council's policy, they'll fund it, and it's just a matter really of making council motions to back that policy decision. So we think that there's certainty in that policy.
Right. Yes.
On this one. So what I would like to see, and it's sort of in the form of a question, is if we task staff with providing language within further language, more language within the bylaw itself, referencing the policy and the implications of the policy, so that it becomes very clear to the reader of the bylaw that this is that. So I'm saying if I could get enough counselors around to agree to that, is that something that staff could do, or is it something that it's impossible to do from a staff perspective?
So you want wording in there that says that council will make decisions according to the policy they've already established.
Basically, what I'm hearing is the right answer. It's how do I bring somebody in here every time somebody comes to town and say, listen, we're going to have to listen to this conversation. Why don't we just embed it in the bylaw somehow so that the language is there? Can that be done?
Commissioner.
Thank you. We can certainly look at it for the life of the bylaw, but we are already, council had already passed a motion to say that program, because the program itself, the industrial program, is not in the bylaw, it's outside the bylaw. Council already passed something and said that program has to exist for 5 years. So to me, I'm going to refer to something inside of a bylaw for a program that's outside the bylaw. It creates some confusion. We've passed a program and we said it has to stay there for 5 years. You know, and maybe in the wording of the program, instead of the bylaw, we state that as a motion of council on this date, it was, you know, it was passed for a 5-year period. And maybe that's what you need to point to instead of the bylaw.
Councillor?
So I still like to task staff with.
Well, I think they have. I think the task was taken up. They're suggesting to do it.
I get it. I'm just not getting the answer that I want. So I think they have to work harder at it.
All right, one more comment here. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Chair, and to Councillor Campion. I think you're asking us to put in writing our interpretation of how we see the policy working. I think that's what you're asking us. I want to maybe provide some commentary on the process and to your example, and specific to Welland. If Mr. DeGazio is out prospecting and finds a proponent who wants to invest, I would hope, and it does happen, he contacts Mr. Oakes, says, hey, listen, I'm meeting with this client. Here's where he's suggesting. Mr. Oakes should be of the awareness of where we are at with our incentive programs. It says, yeah, most likely we're within the budgetary framework and the policy of council. Or it's like, well, wow, we just had 3 or 4 applications. It might require a council approval because we would exceed our budget. That conversation has to happen. And if that conversation is happening, we won't get into a scenario where you create uncertainty when you're out there prospecting. But to your point, if you're asking us to put in writing interpretation of our policy, I guess we can manage that.
You can work on that.
Yeah.
And there has to be some trust here, I think, as well, Council.
I have great trust, but other people don't.
Other people don't. All right, that's fine. Commissioner, did you have anything else on this?
There's an opportunity when we bring forward the bylaw for adoption to have a compendium resolution or motion of the council to reaffirm the program for 5 years.
And when will the bylaw be coming forward? At our next council meeting?
I can't answer that. I believe it's the next council meeting.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Right, it'll be 10 years. Councillor Marshall. Yes, of trust?
Certainly of trust, and not everybody trusts us. I can't believe it, but it's so. And because Frank wants to go out there, Mayor Campion wants to go out there and say, this is the deal, but I have to make about 8 calls first. That's not good enough, I wouldn't think, for somebody doing the negotiating. Why do we have to go to council if our policy is that we're not going to charge? Is it because we're going over the budget? I think it's 3.5 million or something. And we got authorization to go additional million. We shouldn't even be there. If it's 10 million more than that, I would be thrilled. Why do we have to go to council? Why not just say, this is our policy, and that's what we can assure you is okay.
Mr. CAO?
Through your chair to Council Marshall, respectfully, at the City of Welland, you have to go to council to get the approval for the incentive program. And so And for us, we have, as the commissioner indicated, we have delegated authority, but as council, which is really good, that we can spend up to $1 million without coming to council. But should we exceed that, we do what other municipalities do, or staff does, and they bring it to their council respectfully.
It's sort of an accepted way of operating. But one thing I really want to stress here before we go on is that council has bent over backwards to try to satisfy everybody's concerns. And at some point, we have to make a decision, I'll just say that. So we're going to move on. Councillor Campion, are you?
I finished with my questions, but I will have comments on them.
Okay. Councillor Easton.
I think, Madam Chair, that your last comment is probably the kernel of the entire situation. I know that there's been a tremendous amount of toing and froing on this. However, I don't think that the execution of the policy has not been straightforward. And therefore, even the question that I asked in my letter on time last week, it wasn't addressed. And it may not have been addressed because I respect that the commissioner felt that it was probably included in someone else's question, but this was the question that I asked. The comment I made was that we have been testing our plan because we know our changes are going to come in 2018, 2019. And so we were challenged by the consultants in regard to some of the items that were on our list. And in that justification, they were saying, well, your past 5 years has shown the following activity. Why do you think that you're going to be capable of achieving this great amount of work over here when in the past, maybe not so much? So my question was, can the region meet that test? I mean, in the past 5 years, have we really had such a robust list of activities in terms of our DC charge, how the DCs are used, or do they also lag behind? Now, I recognize that we need to put a robust case on the table, and we need to push that out because this is a massive amount of money we're talking about. But so does the consultants and the developers have to push back at the other side. So what is the test that we use? How do you know whether or not you're within those credible boundaries or not?
Commissioner?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, and yes, we chatted about this, and perhaps the finance folks or Mr. Tripp, Commissioner Tripp can comment on it, but, and it's actually aligned with what the home builders are telling us. That, okay, you have a charge, now invest, and you have a fund, you have a development charge reserve, basically build the infrastructure to make sure that we are able to continue on with our development initiatives. And so that's a challenge. And if you recall, we actually adjusted part of the charge initially on the
affordable housing,
for affordable housing,
and
because we knew that we actually couldn't build it within the time frame of the bylaw. But we did have a good look at the infrastructure pieces, and we felt quite confident that we could deliver those. What has our success been over the last 5 years? What I can tell you from a planning point of view is I would be hard pressed to identify any development initiative that was held back because of the lack of regional infrastructure. So yes, we could probably be putting more in the ground, more aggressively in terms of development infrastructure, but at least we've been keeping pace. I don't believe that anybody has been aggrieved by the lack of infrastructure available, capacity limitations, or any allocations, to my knowledge. And perhaps the other commissioners can comment on that if I don't have it right.
Jason, did you have a comment?
Through the chair to Councillor Easton, I think that's a good question. I think if you look at our past 5-year history with regards to what we spent out of our DC policy and our capital and our capital budgets. So if the question is, can we meet the capacity of what we're supposed to build that we've outlined in the capital, in the DC plan, I would say yes, and we take those timelines fairly seriously, and they do get reviewed. And if you look at our past history, we're probably averaging about $170 million plus capital program on an annual basis. So you put that over 5 years, you know, the numbers add up fairly quickly. So when you look at something that says $500 million, seems like a big number, but when you're averaging between 170 and $200 million a year, it does kind of make sense. And if you look at what we spent out of our DC reserves, the challenge is we do have a funding gap, and that's why we're looking for increased DC reserves to cover that. If you look at the DC background study itself, they're averaging somewhere around 2,400 residential units per year for growth. So the growth expectations are slightly higher than where we are today, but that's aligned with a whole bunch of analysis that is done, and that would be what would be required. So, you know, that kind of stuff, if it's technically 80% of the 80% of the capital requirement in the DC plan is essentially transportation and water and wastewater. So if there's specific questions on that, I think Commissioner Tripp would be the best one to answer, you know, those questions, because that is really the bulk of it. It's water, wastewater, and transportation.
And Madam Chair, I could also supplement the fact that occasionally when a development project moves forward, if the region is not in a position to provide the infrastructure solution, sometimes a developer does that on our behalf, and we refund them through the development charge, through our development charge fund or reserve.
Right.
So that happens quite occasionally as well.
All right, Madam Chair, since I have to leave for a very important announcement, which I'm going to ask for your leave to mention it just because it is such a deal for the town of Lincoln. Let me say that this explanation removes a great deal of the subjectivity from what is going on here. However, I will say on behalf of anybody that is doing business with the region, and I hope that the attempt and intent is really to change our practice in the future, and through you to the CAO. You know, we have a policy, there are changes pending, we do our due diligence, we have the legal test, we have consultation with the industry, because we now have all that information in front of us. And then it comes forward to council. This has been very difficult. And we're now, I don't know how many hundreds of pages we are. We almost need a briefing note so that we know which base we're on. And I think to say less than that is really disingenuous, because this is a very, very complicated problem. So I think in the future we need to be our framework has to be tightened down, because this is not a good way to do business, I don't think. And yet, you know, I absolutely agree with the explanations that we're receiving, and all we can do is hope that we're in better shape the next time around. Thank you very much. Madam Chairman, if you would just allow me for 30 seconds to announce I'm leaving to go to Lincoln, where the intra-municipal transit project will be announced.
Great.
Thank
well,
you.
Congratulations for that, and Godspeed. Thank you for staying. Yes. Yes, please. So, would you like a comment, Mayor Easton? Because the CAO would like to make one.
Through your chair to Councillor Easton. So I believe it's actually a legislative requirement. Once a municipality passes its new DC bylaw, there's an onus upon us to communicate that out. And so we have a number of instruments. I think we have to have a brochure, and we will be meeting with all our stakeholders, whether it's the NIA, the Home Builders Association, the local municipalities. So the onus is upon us that once the DC bylaw is approved, that we have to go out and outreach and educate and advise what are the changes and be consistent with our policy.
So, Madam Chair, the CAO, is telling us that the process that we've been following is spot on in terms of the flow and...
CAO?
No, I couldn't agree to that.
We had a little wrinkle.
Couldn't agree to that.
Okay,
We
thank you.
we had a little wrinkle that we was not, we didn't mean to do it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Maves.
Okay, Chair, can I have the chart back up that was on there?
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, you asked for this chart. Are you in this chart presupposing the amalgamation of Pelham into Welland?
Oh, I don't know.
I say that you've left, you've got Thorold on there twice and Pelham once.
Oh,
There are nuns.
sorry. Jean?
So
Which one is Pelham?
Can we assume that Pelham is the second Thorold?
Pelham is the fifth? But you have two Thorolds, but no Pelham. So which one is Pelham of those two? Neither one? Neither one?
Okay, so Pelham,
2019.
Okay.
So it has not been amalgamated.
All right, thank you. You read it correctly.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, can you go to the chart on page 4? I had some fun. Oh, way at the top, page 4. Right there. Okay, I kind of take exception for this to this, and I think it's misleading to the public. The question is about from Councillor Height, how much less by passing the amendments that are being proposed. So, and then if you go back to the, you don't need to stay on this chart, but if I go to the summary of regional development charge rate changes, and it started April 20th, 2017 to 19,000, and now we're at 15,005 for single and semi. So the issue I have with that is I think the original calculations that came through from Watson were closer to this 15.5 number. And then some meetings occurred and they threw in some more things into their calculations of the capital that was going to be required. And I think we put in long-term care and we put in social housing. And when they run the numbers, the number got up to the 19,000 number. So I think that this phase-in cost in 2018, 2019 kind of says, well, look what we're giving up. If you had a chart of we were going from 10,000 to 15.5, like it's a massive amount of money we're collecting, but we're highlighting by phasing in this massive increase from 10,000 to 17,000. Wow, look what we're giving up. And I find that the amount of money you're actually getting into what you're getting in today is on the positive side. It's not a cost to us. So when this gets out in the public says, wow, look at the breaks they're giving to everybody. But it's a break off of theory. If it's a break off of the first draft, it's a break off. I could have picked a number of 25,000 per house. And now that I'm down, I've got it down through all of our processes, I've got it down to 15. I can see, wow, look at the breaks we're giving on DCs. But it's really not. We're still getting a massive increase in DCs.
Okay.
So I don't, I mean, if you provided the same chart about increased revenue due to the DCs in 2018 and 2019, it'd show a heck of a lot of money coming in.
Right. Jason would like to comment.
Well, I'll start.
Commissioner will start.
And then I think Commissioner Burgess will jump in. But the chart actually has limited value because as we know, the development charge bylaw only has a life of 5 years. 5 years from now, you're gonna adopt a new, or the council, whoever's here, is gonna adopt a new development charge bylaw, and you may double the rates. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. So any projection in terms of specifics beyond a 5-year period really don't mean a whole lot because you're going to review it and create new rates at that point in time. So this is just merely an example at face value. It has limited value.
I know it kind of answers the question, but it answers the question from a theorized amount,
Right.
which the council wasn't happy about, and now we're happier with 15,544. So it, you know what I don't know if Jason knows what I'm angling at. And then the chart gets out there, and it's like it comes across like we're giving 16.6 million in DC breaks, but we've raised them 50%. So we're really not giving breaks. You're giving breaks off the first theorized amount.
Commissioner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I do appreciate Councillor Mays' viewpoint, and it's kind of a unique viewpoint. Through this whole debate, I don't think I've ever been criticized of giving away too much, so I'm glad someone thinks we're giving away something. But the intent of this was more around the funding concept. We're moving to any discretionary deduction, and the phase-in cost was, in theory, a discretionary deduction, the one that staff supported, to phase in that, just similar to if council approves the hotel motel, to phase that in. But because it's a discretionary deduction under the DC bylaw, or sorry, the DC Act, we have to forward a mechanism to fund that. And this is limited because it is guesstimates. You'll see that the criteria there, we just used essentially historical averages of what may happen, frankly, with brownfields or any of these other ones where we will have to fund those discretionary credits. And so I agree with you. I think for public perception, I would say that this is more of a budgeting tool and less for a public perception of what we're giving away. I don't think that was the intent of that, though I do understand where you're coming from, and I think it is true. We're trying to go from council has made a number of capital plans that need to be funded, and we need to. We've been very clear, we're trying to get from $25 million approximately in DC revenue up to close to 50 million. These deductions come off of it. And I think we can be very clear with the fact that we anticipate revenue to go up, and we also anticipate some of our credits to go up. And this is just to align with the credit going up. So we can take that back and look at maybe positioning it better for both the revenue side and the credits that are going on.
So why it's relevant is because the hotel item is on the agenda. And I don't want someone here to say, wow, look, we're giving a $3.7 million break to all the hotels. In actual fact, right, we're raising them from 376, 365. So it looks, but we theoretically already rolled them up to 10. So now we got to show what we're rolling back. But really, it's zero, and then you're going to get more money. And I just want to point out that, yeah, you're not really rolling it back from where it's been forever. You're rolling it back from the theorized amount that didn't completely get through council, and now you're showing it as a rollback when in actual fact it's where we started in the first place.
Right. Yeah, and he's going,
it may be zero if nobody builds a hotel.
maybe zero.
Right.
The commissioner is going to rework this before it comes to council. Councilor Mays, anything else?
That's it.
Councilor Height, I know you have to leave, so.
No, I'm not leaving until we finish this.
Oh, good, okay.
We've got to get this done.
Yes, we do.
DC charges are part of what we're spending our capital budget on. The majority of what we're spending the capital budget on is coming out of taxes. Is it not? The public is paying the majority, and the minority is out of DC charges because the DC charges can only deal with what's needed for growth. Is that not correct?
That is completely correct.
So as we're talking, I hope the public don't think this is the only pot of money. This is a small percentage of the money that we're spending. The majority is coming out of the taxpayers that are currently paying taxes because we need to spend money on infrastructure. We're told $1 billion in the next 10 years, in that range. We have to collect it. So I can understand where Councillor Maves going. Well, we're not giving a discount. We just aren't getting the money yet. And escalating it slowly is fair because we're sort of giving the incentive in Niagara Falls, especially saying, you better hurry up because the next few years you're still at the old rate, because if you don't act in the next few years, it's going to go up 3 years in a row, and here's what it's going to 5 years. That's fair, and that's been put in because that's legit. but we still need development charges, and we keep hearing from Welland, well, we want a guarantee. Well, I might not be here tomorrow, and you might not. We can't guarantee there's enough money to pay and give unlimited, here, the bank's open, come to Niagara, we're just gonna give you all the money. Because guess what? Then the taxpayers, your 58,000, my 133,000, whatever the number are in our communities, are gonna have to pay. So someone has to pay, and to give the illusion that, well, we don't really need the money, we need $1 billion in the next 10 years, and we've got to get it somewhere.
What was that? Oh, Councillor Edgar, sorry. I didn't see you.
Oh, that's okay, Chair. I just punched that in just a second ago. I'm just concerned that Mr. Piccioni's concerns haven't been addressed, and I'd just like to make sure that, like to find out whether or not they have.
Right. Who wants to answer? You want to go through them individually now? Yes. Carmen has an answer.
Through Chair to Councillor Edgar, so staff looked at the requested changes. We ran it by legal counsel. We discussed it internally, and we're recommending no changes.
Councillor Edgar?
Thank you, CA.
Right, thank you. Now, we have the report, the PDSC 38. Could I have a motion, please, to put it on the floor by Councillor Height, Councillor Hodgson? Are there any questions or comments to this report? This is the DC bylaw. Councillor Campion. Oh, sorry.
I'm not part of the committee, but I want to get on. How do I?
Well, you're going to speak to the report? Yes, there you are. It's like magic. Councillor Campion.
Yep, thanks. So, been at this for quite a while. I'm going to try to make this as painless as possible. You know, I understand what Councillor Height is saying, but we do need clarity. So I'm hoping that maybe the direction to staff can be that at least prepare some wording that perhaps could be considered at the council meeting, or else I'll come back with an amendment. What I would like to do, Madam Chair, is I've indicated that we did show everyone what our proposed changes would be for the bylaw. We've dropped number 1. We've taken industrial out of number 2. And that's due mainly to the fact that we can't really predict what's going to happen with the incentive programs. So that's part of why that's being done. However, I would like to actually move the rest of my amendments. So number 3, 4, and I think that's it. So we've distributed why we want to make those changes, and essentially what those amendments would do would be to bring us back, particularly in the brownfields, to where we were, which would probably address, I think we heard from Mr. Piccioni that it would address some of those or most of those issues, or they're certainly supportive of it anyway, and as well as other developers have indicated the same thing. So when we're talking about collecting development charges, and we're talking about we need all this infrastructure because we're going to need the capacity for the projected housing market. So all of these, it's really revolving around houses. So what we're proposing in, as far as changing the rates in number 2, is to simply just, we've added in the hotel one just because Niagara Falls was involved in that. But we're proposing that we only reduce the multi-res. And so that's based on the fact that if we don't get the densities. Yeah, sure. You could. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep it as really tight as I can. So really, when we're talking about the brownfields, the industrial, and even the multi-res, they don't represent a huge portion of the DCs that are going to be collected based on construction. So if we're talking about single-family housing, we're talking about townhouses, those are the people that are going to be using the infrastructure that's going to propose, those are the people that are going to pay for it. And so we're not proposing to reduce that number. So what our rationale behind all of the DC and the industrial is because we need that to continue employment in Niagara. That's what it's all about, is partially for housing and partially for development and investment in that resulting in employment. So I think what I'm hearing from maybe staff when I've been working on a lot of this, and is that it's more of a philosophical difference between what Welland is talking about and what the regional staff are talking about. And that is that we are putting employment investment ahead of almost everything, because we need that in our region. It's not happening just because it's happening all over the world. It's not happening all over the world, but it is happening in Niagara. And it's because of these incentives that we're having that investment, the development. I get it, a lot of brownfields are going to be turned into residential, commercial as well. So that's all part of the big program. But we need to ensure that we have these things in place because it is one of the key elements, or certainly part of the toolbox that we're using to create and bring that investment into Niagara, and certainly it's working very, very well in Welland. So, as I said, I want to put them forward. The rationale is there. I'd be happy to answer the question, but if you read the rationale associated with these amendments, it's pretty straightforward. And it's taking a step, looking. Let's go back to where we were. Give it another 5 years. Let it work. Let it happen. And then, as I said, 5 years is short term. In that 5 years, then we can look at, see where we're at, and then adjust accordingly. I'm contending that if we eliminate some of these particularly in the brownfield sector, we're not going to see that development. We're not going to see that income. We're not going to see the investment coming in, the housing in certain areas. And if we don't have that, then we don't have the requirement for the infrastructure that we're projecting for 5 years. So it's kind of a catch-22. Are you going to start to charge for infrastructure that you're projecting you're going to need in the future, and then find out you don't really need anymore because a lot of this isn't happening because we don't have the exemptions?
What you're asking, Councillor, is to go back to the old bylaw, except in a few cases.
Well, I just thought really to go back to the previous bylaw for the DC.
What previous bylaw?
The 62.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that one. For mainly here for the brownfields.
All right.
And I'll finally finish that by saying that I get it. The concept is, well, let's just pay for, what the remediation costs are. You need the bigger incentive or it's not going to happen. Mr. Petroni said, if he doesn't have the tools in place, they're not going to develop those larger projects. And so if that happens, we're going to run into problems. So those are my comments on that. I think it's the right thing to do. I'm hoping we can move that forward to council so the entire council can have a look at a revised or an amended bylaw.
On a point of order, did I not put PDS-C 38-2007 on the floor?
You did.
And this is an amendment? Is that what we're talking about?
It's a huge amendment. It's taking us back to the old bylaw. I don't know. I don't agree that that's the way we should handle this. I think we have to deal with the emotion, that too. The motion we had on the floor, and if it fails, then this one can come up.
Madam Chair, I would challenge that ruling because I believe that amendments are in order for a motion that's before us.
It's totally changed. Make an amendment? All right. So let's deal with the amendment. Councillor, who else wanted to speak to this before Councillor Grenier? Well, I'm sorry. This is an important topic. Councillor, are you ready to speak? Speak. Yes, I am. Members of the committee who want to speak are ahead of you. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you.
To the amendment, please.
Yeah, thank you. I will speak to the amendment and add some comment to it. For the most part, I agree with the amendments on a number of levels. First is that I think we talked in circles with respect to the questioning to Mr. Mastracci, the Commissioner of Planning. And I think that at the end, what we need to do is have a conversation or a policy come to us on how we repopulate the reserve that will be funding the DC incentives, rather than whether or not the reserve is in place. We have that amount, but I think the real issue is how is that reserve going to be repopulated, and how we go to council afterwards for that, so that it doesn't sound like you have to come for incessant approval for those issues. The other part of this, when we speak about multi-res, I had a rather complete and spirited conversation with the CAO about this, and the real issue is that it is currently going to be a disincentive for rental stock properties the way it's currently written. I think we need to have a policy with respect to, similar to the DC, with the brownfields and the industrial exemptions, that we need to figure out a way that if somebody wanted to build rental stock and maintain it as rental stock for a fixed period of time in that they should be eligible for that as well. I have, and I totally believe that anything within the condo market, that multi-res that would have the same fee application, is that market is robust and can absorb the DC fee application. However, the exemptions for social housing are wonderful, but in between the condo market and social housing, the rental stock will not be built unless we find a way to exempt them. And whether or not it gets done or not, it's not being done. We haven't had any real apartments built, but I think that we need to have that tool available if someone's going to help us increase supply in Niagara to stabilize the market and provide another form of housing for people. And we need to actually have that conversation about referring those to that issue. I had another one that I wanted, and I apologize, Madam Chair, for not forwarding this on to the committee in advance, but I believe that if we're going to be intellectually honest on the employment lands and to incent employment lands, we have to talk about small business and commercial. Currently, if you have a commercial property like a restaurant and you wanted to increase the footprint on the existing property, you have to pay 100% of the development charges. I think we need to find a way to all the other municipalities catch up, that 50% of square footage can be applied to commercial properties as well. Until that time, if it, and then I believe all the lower tiers, hopefully it could be a bit of a warning that through the 5 years we'll catch up with CIPs, and that won't be necessary anymore. But I believe in the interim that we need to show some leadership and provide some relief on that level. It probably won't cost us a lot of foregone revenue, but it will be a tool that we can use for expanding current, which is a big public policy thrust throughout Ontario, is to expand those businesses that are currently in place. And if you indulge me, because I do have to leave, Madam Chairman, with that, I believe that Mr. Pichon's presentation, I think we need to divorce it from the bylaw. I think that overall, we made a commitment. We unanimously passed the transition and the compelling of staff here to come up with an agreement with the two large builders in Grimsby. And I believe that we may be going off the rails there, and this is more about keeping our word rather than changing the policy. And if we could find a way to provide an agreement based on what we approved in July to those two proponents that were here that made that presentation, I think that that is our pathway to moving forward. So I made those, I endorsed the WELA, and I put out sort of a bit of a change to make the multi-res a little more palatable, I think, to staff and maybe some of my colleagues here on how we can interpret the residential change. And I think that we should give serious consideration to somehow to help commercial properties. And I said the example of the restaurant moving forward. Thank you for the opportunity. I took your commitment in that of to come here to council to help move the yardsticks along, because I agree with you. We need to put this to bed by at least not this council cycle, the following one, and move on from that. And I just wanted to participate here today. If staff had any comments, I'd appreciate that, but I do have to go to another event.
Right, thank you. Councillor Grenier, thank you very much for being here. Councillor Augustine.
On a point of order, Madam Chair. I think there's some misinterpretation. This is a 400-page agenda, and there's some confusion. People are thinking this is the entire amendment, when in fact it isn't. A small portion is the amendment on page 1, and there's a list, and even those aren't all changes. The single-family dwelling, for example. Is it possible to bring page 1 up, and that second...
Page 1 of?
What's up we're viewing right now. I'm sorry. Well, I don't know how many pages are up there. The first page, and if that could be going up, that's what's being asked for. But the first one, of course, but that's what is being requested, and we can go from there. With just a point of order, so everybody knows what we're talking about. I'm not sure everybody is. Thank you.
What did you? Excuse me. What was put on the floor through the clerk?
Through you, Madam Chair. To my understanding, what was put on the floor was the changes on 3 and 4, which were to Schedule D and E.
Correct. It was 3
and 4.
And 4. The changes to Schedule D and E.
And 2 without the industrial rate.
Okay.
And item 2 without the industrial rate, I believe is what is correct.
I stand to be corrected.
Okay. So we're looking at 2 without the industrial rate, 3 and 4. Councillor Marshall? Thank you. Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to say I appreciate the work of Councillor Campion. I am supportive as I was the last time. I'm hoping we can move on. I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Marshall?
I too. It's been a long process, and the day isn't growing any shorter. I'm going to support the motion of the City of Vaughan.
All right, thank you. And I'll call the question for recorded vote, please. On the amendment. On the amendment. It's there. Sorry? We're looking at 2 without the industrial charges and 3 and 4 changes to Schedule D and E. We're voting. Well, it's 10 seconds, so if you're ready.
Okay.
It's recorded.
The vote is open.
The amendment is lost. Now I'm going to call the question. And can you put those recommendations up, please? Yes, of course. It's report PDSC 38. Those are the recommendations. I'm going to call the question. It is being recorded.
The vote is open.
The motion carries, and thank you very much to members of the committee. It's been a long process. It's not over, but sorry?
Okay, we'll take them off.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anything under other business? Members of the committee, please. Anything under other business?
Oh, we still have to accept those 2 items for information.
Oh, all right. Let's receive items PDSC 40 and PDSC 41 from Dominic Orsini, Chair of the NIA, and from Mayor Campion. A motion to receive, Councillor Joyner. Sure. And Councillor Dart. And don't anybody move, I don't want to lose quorum before we finish this. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Is there anything under other business? Councillor Joyner.
Well, sorry, Madam Chair, and just before everybody leaves here, I know that we had, the last vote was 10-6, and I know that the chair shouldn't have been on there, but there's not 15 people in the room. Huh?
It's not going to affect anything.
You sure? All right.
Yes, I'm sorry, the commission, or no, who are you? The CAO wants to address that.
Through Chair to committee, so we saw that. The clerk did notify, did recognize Councilor Luciani and Chair Caslin were not present, so they're recorded no. We've removed those out of the no votes. The vote still carried.
And what is the total vote now? Yeas and nays.
Through you, Madam Chair, so on the final recommendation, which is still up on the screen, it would have been 10-4.
10 yes and 4 no. Councillor Edgar?
I noticed that Councillor Grenier's name was on the voting list. Is that appropriate?
He's not on the committee. That will not be included on the list.
Thank you very much. Is there anything under other business?
Who's on there?
Seeing none, our next meeting is Wednesday, November 29th at 1 p.m. in this chamber. Thank you for your patience.